Data review. Oh, yeah. The session is data review and data repositories to facilitate open science. And along with me, Bob Downs, the co-chairs of this session are Kirsten A. Leonard, Lily Zhang, and Devin Ray Donaldson. And I'm going to be going quickly through this introduction because we have a lot of presentations for you today. This is a really exciting topic, and we're looking forward to hearing all of your comments and questions. So this is a joint meeting of the Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group and the Domain Repositories Interest Group. And excuse me, for the interest group of Repository Platforms for Research Data, we have Lily Zhang, Devin Ray Donaldson, and myself as the co-chairs. And for the Domain Repositories Interest Group, we have Kirsten Leonard as the co-chair, as a chair. And so just a little bit about the Repository for Platforms Research Data, Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group, in that we're trying to collect usage experiences and define requirements and evaluate implementations and identify limitations so that we can offer some recommendations, knowledge collections, or new working groups. And the domain repositories interest groups, they have all shared interests in data curation, dissemination, preservation, and institutional sustainability. And they're trying to provide a forum for sharing practical experiences and developing joint projects. So today, our agenda is, after I give this overview, I'm going to give a brief introduction. Then Maxie Kainling and Dorothea Strecker are going to talk about results of a data quality assurance study. Then Kirsten Leonard is going to talk about the review process and its development for peer review of extra material samples data. Then Lily Zhang is going to talk about PROTECT, some essentials for crisis data governance. And then Chris Hunter is going to talk about reproducibility checks and data reviews on a pre-publication manuscripts, and he's going to give a GigaScience Press perspective. Then we're going to have a general discussion, and we're looking forward to hearing your comments and questions. So some initial questions for you to consider while we're having all the presentations is just generally, how can data repositories conduct data reviews in a timely manner? We all know about the time pressures for getting data out, and data reviews are another step in the process. And then also, how can data repositories recruit external data reviewers? As we need more reviewers, we have to find people to do that. Similarly, to the process of reviewing articles for publication, it's a challenge to get people to review. And a data review can even be more complex in terms of looking for people with the exact expertise in the data. And then what suggestions can we offer to data repositories for improving the data review practices? So I'm going to move right into my intro at this point so that we can move along. And one question is why perform data review? And we could say that it's really improving the data for reuse, enabling usability, applicability, improving the quality for both research, education, as well as decision-making, and also improving the usefulness, the reliance, and the replicability of data, and enabling verification so that we know that the data actually met the review criteria. It's also improving the reputation of those who are contributing to the effort. So it's not just the data products and services, but the data producers and their resulting publications, the repository and the resources that they have, including staff, and then sponsors of the data projects and repositories, and then any host institutions that might be involved as well. So in terms of progress on review of research data, we have a lot of traditional limitations to data review in that traditionally data were not necessarily shared openly, and people often applied licenses to the data that were restrictive, or worse, they didn't apply any licenses, so people didn't know what they could do or what they couldn't do. And then data often weren't deposited in a repository for dissemination, and they weren't necessarily prepared for use by others. And then the expertise with the data was needed to assess and use the data, and then the manuscript review didn't necessarily cover that, which is problematic. But now we're going more into an open science era where the culture of scientific practices is changing, and the research sponsors are encouraging the open data sharing as part of open science. And open licenses are available and really being recommended by the project sponsors. Such licensors or even like public domain notices or acknowledgements, or the CC BY licenses. And then domain data repositories, they can offer the curation of the deposited data, which can include data review. And more of the domain repositories especially are looking at how they can improve data for reuse by having the data review processes. But there are many challenges associated with the review of research data. And, often when people talk about data review, we're not all saying the same thing. So people could be talking about automated reviews or cursory reviews that are taking place, or they could be talking about peer review, which would be from external or independent reviewers. And the review criteria also varies. And some people think, well, are we just going for usability, or are we looking at this quality, or are we looking at the scientific value? And it might be all of those things. And then the expertise varies among data repositories. And if you have one discipline there um, representing in your repository, it might be a challenge if you're getting data from multiple disciplines. And then more documentation may be required in that regard. And then more data preparation is needed so that people can review the data. And so it's not really the preparation just for reuse, but you want to make sure that the reviewers are able to understand that now, and that you've got the documentation, et cetera, in there. And then the costs and recognition for conducting data reviews. And to me, this is really one of the biggest challenges, because the reviews are time consuming, and we do have to get people to ultimately volunteer to do this. When we should look at ways in which we can reward and recognize such efforts. And as we look at the overall scope of data review, as we go more towards the scientific peer review, which is with the external or independent reviewers, our time, cost, the criteria involved, the training required, and the recognition all has to increase. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we need to balance some of these in terms of the time and the resources needed. And in doing that balance, we still have this challenge of being able to recruit the expert reviewers and then to conduct those data reviews quickly so that we can get the data out as soon as possible. And finally, it's important that we motivate data reviewers, and some ways could be through, remuneration of some kind, honorarium, stipends, etc., or even, travel, or some kind of service contracts. We can also recognize them in terms of giving them some formal titles or establishing a committee, having them be part of that committee membership, uh, establish an editorial board, and even have collection editors for each of the different collections of the repository. And then we can also give them things that they can use when they're trying to be recognized within their own institutions or organizations, such as formal appointment letters or annual letters of appreciation, or notifying their institutions and sponsors, sending a letter to the chair of the department, for example. And then we can publish recognition about them, have an online roster of reviewers or reviewers for the current year, and have even a newsletter announcement where we mention all the people who have contributed during the past year to the reviews. And then a reviewer of the year award or some other awards, such as outstanding reviewers, might be helpful. And then, very importantly, I think we need to try to reduce the review effort as much as possible. So if we can perform pre-reviews, that is, get that done in-house before we try to get the volunteer reviewers to do it, we can reduce their workload and not keep on picking on the same reviewers over and over again. I think we need to, try to balance there and give them enough time to complete their reviews, and also assign the reviews based on their interests. And so with that, I want to thank you, and I'll stop sharing. And then our next speaker, it's actually speakers. It's going to be Maxi Kinling and Dorothea Strecker, and they're going to talk about results of data quality assurance study. Please take it away, Maxi.
I hope you can all see my screen and hear me.
Yes.
Great. So today we want to first we want to thank the chairs of this session for inviting us. We are my colleague Maxi Kindling and I'm Dorothea Strecker, and today we want to present the results from a survey we conducted on data quality assurance at research data repositories. And I think from what I heard from Bob just now, I think this fits very well into the work of the interest groups. So the paper we published in the paper we talk about today, we published in the Data Science Journal, and the anonymized survey data are accessible on Zenodo. I will post links to both resources in the chat. Just a second, I need to fix the links. So I think that should work. Yeah, I'm going to jump right in. I will start by giving a few introductory information, and then Maxi will present the main findings of the survey. So this piece of research was conducted as part of the project Re3 Data Co-Ref, and is also part of Maxi's dissertation. And first, we started by reviewing the existing literature on data quality, and we found that research data quality assurance includes many aspects, and these range from defining what quality actually means in a given context to taking specific measures to improve quality and documenting interventions, among several other steps. In her dissertation, Maxi developed a framework of data quality assurance, which you can see here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is basically the foundation of the survey. And in the survey, we wanted to focus on two major areas. The first one being how do research data repositories define data quality, and the second being what quality measures they have implemented. we chose to conduct a personalized online survey, which we distributed in 2021. And we sent the survey out to more than 1,800 repository operators. And the contact information was retrieved from the registry re3data, and we chose re3data not just because it was associated with the project we were in, but also because it's currently the largest registry focused on research data repositories. In total, we received 332 complete responses, and we took great care in designing the questionnaire. It was informed by 2 qualitative analyses that were conducted prior to the survey. One of the analysis was of Quadtrust Seal self-assessment documents, and the other of guidelines of data journals. And these analyses provided us with a first notion of what aspects were considered at repositories and data journals when tasked with ensuring data quality. I'm going to now move over to the results section. And I want to start by giving a distinction that also ties in with what Bob said just now. Generally in the literature, that there is a distinction between the formal assessment and review of data, where formal assessment generally refers to technical, administrative, and access-related aspects, whereas data review refers to ensuring the scientific quality of data sets. So typically there is this distinction made. And the survey results showed that, first of all, more than 3/4 of participating repositories did perform 1 or 2 of those types of quality assessment, and the rest didn't do any quality assessment at all. Of the repositories that did perform quality assessment, 132 in total performed either 1 of formal assessment or review of data, and 122 did perform both. So actually, any combination of the 2 options are possible and are actually performed in practice. And now I will hand over to Maxi, who will report on the survey details, survey results in greater detail.
Thanks, Dorothea. I hope you can hear me. Okay. As Dorothea said, I would like to go more into detail of the survey results. And on the first slide, you can see results from 2 questions that were on responsibilities for fulfilling or evaluating certain quality criteria. And the given selection of possible answers or quality criteria is actually based on one of the preliminary studies that Dorothea already mentioned. In this case, it was the questionnaire from the Quadtrust Seal self-assessment. And as you can see, the top 3 criteria for formal assessment include that a basic metadata description or documentation is provided, that the clarification of copyright and usage rights is provided, as well as metadata compliance with the metadata schema. And the top 3 criteria for data review include availability of overall data and documentation quality, appropriate metadata and data documentation, as well as suitability to the scope of the repository. Next slide, please. And one of the reasons to separate formal assessment from data review in our concept of quality measures was the assumption that different groups of people are responsible for either data curation and formal assessment or data review. The results actually show that for data curation as well as for data review, mostly data curators, research data managers, technical staff, and subject experts at the hosting institutions are responsible. I think this might be an interesting result also for the discussion of the 2 interest groups. Another aspect we found very interesting and we knew less about at the point of the survey was the question, how many repositories are actually rejecting data deposit? And of the repositories that would consider rejecting data deposits, some provided an estimation of the rate of rejected data sets in the last 2 years. On average, the respondents reported a rejection rate of around about 8%, and 6 repositories reach or surpass a rejection rate of 50%. And one repository stated that they even reject 70% of data sets that were planned to deposit. And 31 respondents reported a rejection rate of 0%. We also looked into quality evaluation by procedures that involve repository users in data evaluation. For instance, by offering quality ratings, user surveys, or reports. And what we can see in the results is that the majority of repositories do not involve users in quality evaluation, or they do accept only non-public textual feedback. But we could also see that nevertheless, 35 repositories, for instance, conduct user surveys. And due to the time available, we would like to leave the survey results at this point. But I would also like to point out that we held a workshop after the survey in the Re3 Data project. And we organized the workshop together with Trust Seal with the objective to have a closer look at approaches to data quality management from different domains, as well as from the perspectives of Re3 Data and CTS. And the workshop confirmed that quality measurement approaches are diverse. And this also extends to the terminology and definitions used to describe data quality, as well as data quality measures. I think Robert mentioned it also in the beginning of his short summary. And the workshop materials and the report is also openly available. And with this, here's our conclusion. So we conclude that repositories play a significant role in quality assurance of data publications, which is certainly not a surprise for all of you. We also found that the approaches are diverse and repositories perform a variety of measures and practices, but they do not necessarily perform all categories of measures that were described in our framework or in our concept of quality measures. And we also have to add here that quality assurance in general is not relevant to all repositories equally. So it's of course depending on the type of the service we are talking about. For us, the distinction between formal assessment and data review is not always clear, as Robert said in the beginning as well. And meeting this challenge was also a challenge in the survey design. The survey confirms a path dependence of data review on the review process of text publications. So data corresponding to a peer-reviewed publication was one of the important criteria for including data in the repository in the first place. And in the survey, we also looked at the extent to which data quality or a certain level of data quality is made visible. And one of the conclusions that we made concerning visibility was that quality assurance needs to be much better acknowledged and thus also needs to be much more visible. And this is also related to the improvement of the reputation of all stakeholders, as Robert has been saying before. And with this, we invite you to have a closer look into our paper, and thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dorothea and Maxi. This is great. Do we have any questions for Dorothea and Maxi? Okay, well, not seeing any questions yet. I have a question. You know, you've been talking about the formal assessment, and then at one end of the extreme, and then the data review at the other end. And I'm just wondering whether you've thought about, or people even talked about, where there are different levels of data review, such as like along a continuum. Or another way might even be to look at it in terms of on a couple of different axes, like a typology. And I'm just wondering if any of the repositories that you worked with were either giving like different types of data review to different data that they received, and if they even had a way of characterizing those kinds of reviews.
Interesting question, thanks. But actually, we did not focus on this level of detail in the survey. So it was a little more on an abstract level, but I guess that this is the case for sure.
Yeah,
I remember one case, sorry, I remember one case from the workshop. I think it was the UK Data Service, Social Science Data Archive, and they distinguished between levels of curation, and then accordingly they adapt the measures they employ. But I think they are very, very mature in their approach, and I think it's not comparable to other repositories. Always.
Yes, maybe we'll see more of that as repositories mature. Do we have any other questions for Dorothea and Maxie? Okay, well, not hearing any. Next, we have Kirsten Leonard, and she's going to be talking about the review process and its development for peer review of astromaterial samples data. Please go ahead, Kirsten.
I can't share my screen yet. Yeah, okay, thanks. Whoops. Why is this? Okay, well, thanks, Bob. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited to hear about all these news about the review process, and already learned quite a bit through what Maxi and Dorothea reported. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the astromaterials data system and its effort to actually put a peer review process in place.
I don't see your screen, Kirsten.
Really?
No.
That's strange. It shows my screen here. Let me try again.
Yeah.
It says it's weird. I've never seen this before. Okay, maybe now. Do you see it now?
Yes. Yeah, it looks
okay. There was something new. Okay, let me move on quickly then. Just to give you a quick introduction, the astromaterials data system is NASA's designated archive for laboratory analytical data that are generated on samples returned from space by NASA missions, such as the Apollo mission or the recently famous OSIRIS-REx mission. These are very precious samples, but the data actually haven't been archived for many years, and it's the astromaterials data system is still being put in place. It's been around for a couple of years now, but hasn't really started to do data review yet. The data that are hosted at the astromaterials data system are quite diverse because there are many properties, chemical, physical, mineralogical, and so on, analyzed on these samples, different materials, and specifically many different methodologies, instrumentations, and so on that participate. And the data are coming from two different sources. They come from mission sample analysis teams that is new at NASA, or they come from research projects. And that's kind of a relevant aspect of the peer review process. Astromet operates both an archive and a synthesis database, and so it's really important for Astromet to get data with relevant metadata into its archive so that the synthesis can be fully populated with all the relevant information that makes the data reusable and also analysis ready. So in this workflow that we have, we acquire the data into the archive via API or web forms. There is a curation process in place that currently has an internal review. And yeah, the other dissemination is not as relevant to this particular topic. So the current pipeline and workflow of data curation includes our internal curators doing a validation on data and metadata, cataloging them, assigning DOIs, and having landing a page. But we're adding to this now the data review as required by NASA for the new scope of the astromaterials data system. I'm not sure, is all these, if they, yeah, I have some black bars from Zoom blocking some of the slides, so I hope that's not happening.
They look okay for us.
It looks okay. Okay, great. So when we obtained the grant from NASA to operate the astromaterials data system, the archive, I should say, we have to comply with certain expectations. We have to go through the Core Trust Seal application and certification. We established an external advisory committee that is part of the extraterrestrial materials analysis group that NASA has put in place. We need to comply with community standards and best practices and establish an external peer review that aligns with the existing external peer review process of the planetary data system. So we have been really struggling, I have to say, with this, with establishing the peer review process. There are a lot of open questions that pertain to the diversity of our data that we are supposed to host. And you know, other challenges that I'll mention in a moment. So we have to ask ourselves what actually needs to be reviewed with respect to data, to methodologies, to the analytical protocols, and so on. Who can perform this review? There are data managers out there, there are scientists, there are curators at other repositories. Who is best suited for doing the review? We need to establish the criteria, obviously, for acceptance and rejection. And we need to figure out how to manage this whole review process, because that's quite a time-consuming effort. And so we've really been looking also what are our constraints and limitations in resources, in our funding, in humans available to do all this. So, whoops. So there are lots of challenges that we encounter. The first one is that laboratory analysis, geochemical, cosmochemical data doesn't have internationally recognized data standards. So it's difficult to establish the criteria against which we do the review. I mentioned already how huge the diversity is of the data types that we get. So how do we scale the process in really accommodating these different types of data protocols, different communities that have different cultures and different practices established? One of the biggest challenges is that the community that actually does laboratory analysis on astromaterials is not very large, and so it's difficult to actually find reviewers from the science community. But on the other hand, there is a substantial volume of data submission when it comes to missions analyzing the data, and just this currently ongoing OSIRIS-REx sample analysis has over 100 labs that participate in the analysis. So we need to figure out ways to streamline the process. The community culture has not been very favorable to open data sharing. And so there is a lot of convincing to do and incentivize submitters and reviewers. And clearly, Bob mentioned that already, that the integration with the publication workflow is quite challenging, especially if this review process takes its time and the researchers are used to just publish without any delays from a data review. So this is just an example to show you our challenge with OSIRIS-REx. We expect this year about 12,000 data sets to come to us that would require such an enormous amount of effort that we simply can't perform the review in the usual way of sending each data set out to a reviewer and then processing the feedback and communicating it to the data authors and so on. So what we're doing right now is really engaging the community. The OSIRIS-REx sample analysis team has already come up with a proposed process that we're now evaluating in the context of a broader process and broader policies for the whole repository. The important is that we're distinguishing here between general peer review criteria and data type specific review criteria. So that was mentioned earlier, and I didn't know about these distinctions that are made already in this context of peer review. We're trying to build on existing resources as much as we can. The USGS data review checklist has already been serving to inform what we want to implement. But as I said, I've now learned a lot more and hope that we can make more progress quicker. So currently our draft is that we will work with the mission teams to establish our quality assessment and quality control procedures, and do that with the participating labs so that the quality of data that comes into the repository is already optimized. We continue to work with the international communities to push for quality standards in geochemistry. And we participate in two different efforts here, the One Geochemistry Initiative and the World Fair Project. We will continue to perform an initial review of quality internally, automating that to the degree possible, and then requesting improvements from the data submitters before we forward the data sets to an external peer review. We will deliver the results of the internal review to the external reviewers and just request very specific review of domain methods and of the protocols for data acquisition and documentation. In that context, we want to encourage researchers to publish their analytical protocols in peer-reviewed journals, which is already helping to tick a box on the quality of the data. We plan to package data that come from the same lab, have the same protocol and so on, to streamline the process. We want the labs themselves to suggest reviewers so that there is a greater chance that we actually get a positive response from review requests. And the last thing that we are starting just now to do is to establish an online review management system that will help the whole review workflow with communication between the reviewers, the data submitters, and the curators at our repositories. That's it. Thanks, Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Kirsten. And I already see a question here in the chat from Sung Young. Sung Young, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, hi. Yeah, it was a lot of active discussion going on. So at first I brought up the data curation network, which is widely popular, at least in the US. They have a well-developed kind of curation process called the curated stats. And they also publish a lot of data primers, which shows you how to curate data. And basically, you're trying to make data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the presentation shared earlier, the criteria basically will be covered if you make your data fair. So that's what I was talking about. But I don't know if it's, it's widely accepted in globally, and certainly in the US, it's a leading organization to kind of have a consensus in terms of how to create data in institutional data repository. So that's, there was a chat about, fair criteria doesn't cover everything. And then there's a question, point about scientific value, but I don't know how we can, decide whether to accept or reject the data based on scientific value. Who defines the scientific value, and is any consensus? It's very subjective in a way. So all scientific data has its own value because it's like a big puzzle. Null data can be useful later on down the line. If you have other pieces of puzzle, then it helps. So that's why NIH, for example, wants to share all data, as soon as possible. If there's a justifiable reason to not share, that's allowable. And then, I just mentioned fair data principles, but we also have to, consider care data principle for endogenous data, which was mentioned earlier. So I know I threw out a lot of different things, but this is a community I want to share, what we're heading in the US and what we want to go as a global community. So I would like the feedback, and thank you.
Yeah, I think at our at Astromed, clearly FAIR is a substantial guidance for what we want to do, but it goes beyond, I think. As I mentioned, we have these synthesis databases, so there is an aspect of actually making data analysis ready and complying with, certain vocabularies, standards of, data reporting units and so on, that comes into play. And then there is the aspect of, is the data appropriate for this repository, which, I expect it will be a lesser challenge, but.
Right. So there's a domain specific, repository. So, you can deposit there first. If you don't find it, you go to generalist repositories such as gray repositories or institutional data repository. But standards become, so first of all, reusable is, we put a lot of emphasis on it because without, proper license, how you can reuse it is almost costly, too prohibitive, because trying to figure out, what is allowed, what is not allowed is very, costly. And It's just we can reuse the data if that's the case. That's why we emphasize the license part. But in terms of standards, there's a fairsharing.org, which has probably the biggest database for standards. But domain-specific repository does offer like a data type specific sample submission, which has community accepted metadata standard. But generalist repository is hard to do because we accept all different types of data. So we go by like a general metadata schema, typically from DataCite, but sometimes specific data type requires additional metadata. So how do we handle that? So I think if there's a discussion around that, do we start to implement more, data type specific sample submission? So CDA metadata workbench has a template, and that's more geared toward the data type. So if generalist repository start to implement more like a sample submission type metadata, we can implement CDA metadata template, and they can make it available to different generalist repositories. So that's the one way to go to kind of minimize the gap. Dryad kind of started doing that. Open Science Framework also started doing that. So that's something we could discuss, as a way to more standardize, data deposition into repository, make it more findable with the rich metadata, and then collect data type specific metadata even in the gray repositories. So that's I wanted to fill out.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that, Sonia and Kirsten. Our next speaker is Lily Zhang, and she's going to talk about protect essentials for crisis data governance. Lily, can you share your screen?
Share my screen.
Not yet. It said you started screen sharing. Okay, yeah, I see it now. If you put it in presentation mode, it might be bigger. Yeah, looks great.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So this is Lily from CNIC CAS, and my topic is probably something jump out of the box for data review. It's more of the review for data work, especially in the crisis situations. And this report is also from a recently published paper in the Data Science Journal. And the topics begins with several discussions focusing on crisis data management. And we have several discussions, especially with the leadership of the CODATA International Data Policy Committee. And with the review process, we see that currently, according to the UN handbook, we have so many disasters around the world. They range from different types, and among all of these hazard situations, data is very important in promoting the disaster mitigation. It could be the methods for data curation, it could be the data entities themselves, and it could be the capacities how to educate and capable of manage data in crisis. And it could also be the infrastructures like repositories, like other facilities support the sharing of data and the communication, especially during the crisis process. So as for the crisis data management, there probably will be so many different suggestions on how to guide the proper management of such data in kind of scenarios for hazards. And so in this paper, we are trying to provide the kind of a checklist for what kind of essentials we probably will include through a kind of crisis scenarios. And finally, we find the components listed as this figure. You probably could see that there are different components. The first is we should have like the stakeholders, the people involved. And the second is about the data entities. But for data resources, it's not only for the data themselves, it also includes something like the data infrastructures, the funding for data, and some other affiliated resources. And based on the people and the resources for crisis data management, we also need to have the tailored strategies to guide such resources management. So the operation during the process for crisis management is the last one and is the more hands-on session. And back to our resources, we probably need a few things more, like the make full use of, take full advantages of the technologies to support us for data management in crisis. And besides, which is also important, like the recent very popular discussion for something like the generative artificial intelligence and things like that, the data ethics, how to guide the technology adoptions following the true values for data during the crisis situations, and to make it effective and beneficial to different stakeholders, potential stakeholders, and to protect the rights to information through crisis situation is also very important. And besides, we also think about for the data work, the communication to share those data and to share the knowledge behind those data is also very important. And most important, based on the crisis management for data, the trust ecosystem should just have its important role. And always remember that the trust is not only, how to say, co-built or co-constructed within the crisis data management ecosystem, but it also can be nourished from the culture of the society and a lot of others. So from the whole process, we identify the protect essentials that could govern the crisis data policies as this. And how to use the kind of essential. Probably we propose the kind of the up principles. Like for people, it should be gathered together to represent the different interests of their group, and especially get focused with those unserved populations. And besides, for resources, how we define the data are really prepared enough. We should focus on the data resources, the facilities to support them, and whether there are enough financial supports to direct the data curation or any exploration within unexpected situations. And besides, the operation, the strategic management of data resources, and to balance the interest between this kind of crisis situation is always should be tailored into scenarios. So it's always the flexible, unique operation. And besides, how would we think about the technology adoption? Probably we need always to make full use of the cutting edge technologies and make it robust enough and prospective, both currently and in the future. And for ethics, for data ethics, we probably need to think a lot more. And based on all of this, the mutual trust should be sustained both long-term and short-term. And back to our discussion. So for data review in the crisis situations, how does that look like? I would say that for like the review of the data work is not limited only to the data entities, but also through the whole process of the data work through crisis. It should cover different dimensions. The whole protect the essentials should be included, like how we envision or how we evaluate the data quality and the robustness of the data facilities behind, and the enough or the adequate or technologies to support those, And we also need to review the data ethics, whether it's fair enough for resilient data disaster risk reduction. And besides, we probably need to have a full review about strategies and other ways of sharing those data and other knowledge through the kind of process. So for the review of their work in crisis situations, I would like to say that it should be embedded through the whole disaster mitigation process during like mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And the ultimate goal probably should be to co-build a kind of a trustworthy ecosystem within which we highlight the open science way. So this is something of a brief introduction to the protect essentials in crisis situation and the quick ideas on how to review the work on recent things. And based on the crisis data management, recently we have been discussing how to extend our current work and to get a kind of a more rich discussion on open data methods, metrics, and management to guide the sharing of their work. So a kind of international team has been collaborating with a journal called Data Intelligence and call for paper of similar topics. So anyone interested can turn to a certain document to have a look. That's all for the discussion today. Thank you. And I will share the paper information through the chat box. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lily. That was really interesting. And are there any questions for Lily amongst those present? I don't see any questions, but I do, and I'm just wondering, considering the urgency of data during a crisis, that is, we need to respond right away, and the data needs to get to the right people. I'm just wondering how we might be able to afford that quick access to the data and use for crisis decision making and review it to make sure that it's the appropriate data for the crisis in a timely manner, so that the people who need the data to make those crisis decisions will be able to do so.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and thanks, Bob. As I mentioned, for the crisis data management, there are always unexpected situations, and we can never be prepared for any crisis, or it will not be called a kind of crisis at all. And for all of the process, what we could learn is the lessons from the past. So in the paper, actually, there are some kind of a lightweight case study you probably could turn to. And the highlights is always to get a kind of something ready before any crisis. So for the data resources, for the people, the potential stakeholders, we should have this kind of a checklist in our pocket to before any crisis emerge. And we probably need to practice the strategies, how we operate this. And we also should have a kind of ethical guidelines, how we use the technology, how we make full use of the data, how if we encounter something of the crisis in which the communication is not so good. So we need to make clear where the data resources and how we allocate these resources to address the best way. And we know that we are always not ready for the next one. So it's an evolving process and we'll go together. So as I mentioned through the framework, the last but also important thing is to kind of establish a kind of trust ecosystem in which no matter what kind of situation we encounter, we probably can basically promote the sharing of data at our most efforts to kind of promote these issues. So it depends. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Lily. Yes, we really do need to get as much preparation done in advance as possible in anticipation of such crises. Moving along, our next speaker is Chris Hunter, and he's going to be talking about reproducibility checks and data reviews on pre-publication manuscripts. He's going to give us a GigaScience Press perspective. Please go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much, Robert and Devon, for inviting me to present here, and hello to everybody. Hopefully you can all see my slides there.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so my name is Chris Hunter. I'm the director of GigaDB, which is part of GigaScience Press. I'm going to give you who, why, when, what, and how of what GigaScience Press is and what we do in terms of data curation and data review. Now, bear in mind, this is supposed to be a 7-minute talk, so there's going to be a lot of overview situation rather than sort of details as such, but I'm happy to share as much detail as people need. So the who. The GigaScience Press is an academic publisher where we currently publish both GigaScience and Gigabytes. There's 2 journals in the life science domain. If you want more information about those, it's gigasciencejournal.com or gigabytejournal.com. But in addition to that, within the GigaScience Press sort of family, as it were, we have GigaDB, which stands for the GigaScience Database or GigaScience Repository. And essentially that's the part I look after, and that's where we do the data curation associated with the manuscripts that we publish in the 2 journals. So why? Well, effectively, I just wanted to have a little recap here of why we bother with this, because a lot of journals don't have the database side of things and don't do the sort of data curation that we do on things. But essentially, one of the main focuses of GigaScience Press is transparency. We want to make sure that everything that's published through us is as transparent as it can be, is open, is fair, is all of those buzzwords. But essentially, transparency was the first sort of port of call that we started with just before the FAIR principles came out. In fact, long before the FAIR principles came out, we started with this. And essentially, we concentrate on reproducibility as the main way of making sure that everything is transparent as possible. Essentially, we take the manuscript that the authors produce. We want to know that if you've got those same methods that they've used and you've got the same input data that they've created, you can get the same results. Essentially, that's what reproducibility is. There's all these other points in this matrix here which are classed as reproducibility, but they're not what we focus on. That's more for what the peer reviewers and the scientists do with the manuscript afterwards. They want to know that they can use the same method on a different set of data or those other things that are in that matrix. So essentially what we're focused on is the reproducibility in terms of same data. Is that data available? Are there methods available? So the when. So this is an important part in our pipeline. So you might not be able to read the workflow on the side there, but don't worry too much about it. Essentially it's just showing our whole workflow. And there are sort of 2 points at which the GigaDB team get involved and do the data review side of things. So essentially before peer review, so at the point where the editorial team have looked at the manuscript and said, yeah, we're likely to send this out to peer review. Before it goes to peer review, they send it to the GigaDB team. One of my team looks at the paper and does a data audit. It's a pretty simple check through the methods section and through the data availability statement to say, have the authors made everything available? So there's a big red flag. If the authors have put data available on request, there's a huge red flag there. We do not allow that in our papers. So we have to go back to them and say, where's that data? Make it available. So that's one of the key points that we look for in there. And there's various ways, and I'll talk about the how in a moment, that we can do that. And then also after it's gone through peer review, so the peer reviewers had a chance to look at this data as well as in collaboration with the manuscript. If that's accepted for publication before it's published, the GigaDB and my team will assist the authors in making sure that all that data is actually published, because at the pre-review stage, it might still be privately held. So at the post-review, we'll also go through and make sure that the authors are putting everything in the appropriate repositories, whether that be GigaDB or whether that be external repositories. We make sure that it's there. We make sure that it's got appropriate licenses and as much metadata as can be available. So the next part is we focus on the what. So essentially, I've kind of described a bit of it, but the basic principles are we look at the methods, we want the input data, and we want the output data. They're the sort of 3 core parts that we want. And in order to know what those are, we have to read the manuscript. So we're going through the manuscript looking for all of these different things, that essentially experiments that they performed, whether that be wet lab experiments or software and code and dry lab experiments. So we look for those sorts of things. And we make sure that the data has been made available in appropriate locations already, if it's external repositories. We also check the licenses on those repositories. If they don't want to make it public immediately, but have data to share, then we can host that privately on our servers just for peer reviewer access. And the same with the software and code that has to be made sure that's put into a public repository. Usually that's something like GitHub. We ensure that they are at least prepared to put an appropriate license on it. And for us, appropriate means an open license of some sort, whether it's an OSI license for software or a CC0 or CC BY for data. So make sure that they are either already on it if they're public, or that the authors are aware that it will have to be put under one of those licenses if they're accepted for publication. Formats wise, again, appropriate here is we're based on open, so everything has to be open. So we look for open formats. So to the extent where we prefer not to publish Excel files, because that's not a strictly open format, it's a proprietary format. So we request that they convert these things into CSV or TSV. Similarly, any of those proprietary formats, we prefer to put them in open formats like imaging files and such like. So that's another curation step that we go through, and we ask the authors to do that. And the methods are transparent and understandable. So that does require a little bit of knowledge in the area of the manuscripts. So the how, again, I've kind of covered this as I've gone through a bit, but essentially it's a person. We don't automate any of this yet. It's internal checks done by my curation team, of which there are myself and 3 others that deal with all the manuscripts that come through. We look for the input data. So if they've generated data, where have they hosted it, where have they put it? If they've reused other people's previously published data, have they cited it correctly? Is it in a public repository? Do they have permission to use that data? Methodology, so whether that's code or wet lab, to make sure that that's described adequately within the manuscript or on a repository of some sort like protocols.io or somewhere like that. And then the results, or the data files, essentially what they have produced. We also do go a step further in some cases. We offer to host intermediary files where they've created large intermediary files from large data sets. So if it's very expensive to reproduce those things, sometimes it's prohibitive for other people to do that. So we will host intermediary files on occasions. And essentially what we do is we feed back what the authors have found, what the curators have found out to the authors, enable to allow them to update their either data repositories or their manuscripts, depending on which bits need updating. But as we move forward, we're hoping to make use of sort of machine learning and natural language processing tools to be able to not automate, but to assist the curators in doing these things. So we actually started a trial with a company called DataSeer, which has a natural language programming interface which goes over the manuscripts and looks for key phrases and things like that. So we're hoping that will at least streamline the process to enable it to be quicker for our curators to look at these manuscripts and pull out the relevant parts. But that's still just a trial at the moment, so we're hoping to be able to do more of that. And essentially that's all I wanted to get through, but there's obviously a lot more details. If people have got questions, I'm happy to answer them. These slides are already available on Figshare, and if you want to get in touch with me, it's chris@gigasciencejournal.com, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. And yes, Sung Young has a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Yeah. So I don't know if you aware of protocols.io. It's a yeah, okay. So a lot of times, the method section, authors will describe, but often it's not sufficient, doesn't capture all the details. But if they actually publish the data of the protocols in protocols.io, it gets the DOI. And then if you put that into their manuscript, and the advantage is actually they take it, when people click on it, it take them to the site. But if there's an updated version, it'll also show there's an updated version. And you can download as a step-by-step, worksheet, you can run it. So I think that'll really address the reproducibility issue. And it gives enough detail for people to follow. So,
yes, we've been long time promoters of protocols.io. We've been in touch with Lenny, who started it many years ago. So we've been involved with them for a long time. And actually, we've gone a step further than that with Gigabyte. We're even able to embed the protocol.io page within the manuscript itself, so you can even see it within the manuscript. And the same on GigaDB, we have a widget where we can embed those protocol.io's pages within the data sets. So we're
Right.
well aware of protocols. And
So
results.
yeah, okay, great. But are you mandating it? Like, for example, Sales Press, they have a start protocols, which is, you know, their own version, but they mandate it. So they cannot publish unless they actually comply with that one. So unless you do that, if it's optional, you know, it won't be standardized. Not everybody will use it.
So we can't mandate a for want of a better word, a competitor's tool, because it's obviously not published by GigaScience, so we can't mandate that specifically, but it's we do encourage it, and we have encouraged it for a very long time. There's also the issue of mandating something that isn't necessarily fit for purpose for all of the manuscripts that come through our door. So until, well, actually, it's even now, protocols.io is not that great for software workflows and
Oh, sure.
protocols in software. So you can't mandate it for those sorts of things. So we can't mandate it across the board, but for wet lab work, we strongly encourage it, and it's
Right.
that's the best we can do.
Yeah,
I
that's
also
what
see-
I would with that word.
There's also a question from Limar Pear.
Yes, hi, great. Chris, so interesting. I just have a clarification question, I guess, about the results part that you talked about. Do you actually do the reproducibility checks where you execute the code, or do you just look for the existence of the results in a file? No,
we as the curation team, we are looking at, is the data there? Is it potential? Is the methods there? So we don't actually run the code ourselves, but our peer reviewers are strongly encouraged to do so, and because we've given them all of the tools to be able to do so, we hope they do. Obviously, it's peer reviewers; you can't always guarantee it, but yeah, that's our theory. We make it as reproducible as we can, and then the peer reviewers can do their job.
Thank you.
And I also see a question from Devin Ray Donaldson.
Yes. Could you put the last slide back up for a minute? Because I wanted to get the link to the slides and I didn't get it in enough time.
Okay, it's actually in the shared doc if you want it out of there as well, but I can share my screen and put it back up.
Okay, so that link down at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah.
And then were you saying data seer, or is there a name for the program that kind of looks over the manuscripts for certain things?
It is literally as it's
or is that a thing y'all found to do that?
It's a company, well, not for profit, that has been spun up out of Coco, was it? One of the it was originally all open source stuff, and they've now started to do it as a not for profit, as a company. And it is called Data, DATA, SEER, SEER. I think it's dataseer.io if I remember rightly.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I also see another question from Sung Young, and I'd also like to suggest that if we have questions for any of the speakers, please go ahead. Sung Young first.
Oh, yeah, this is more like a request. I put it in the chat box, but it's not gaining traction. I mean, these are all great slides and there's a lot to digest. So if you could share these slides, I think all of us will really appreciate it. Is it possible to share the links in the chat or the, notes or something?
Yeah, I
That's
think
possible.
what we're going to do is ask each of the presenters to put their slides up on whatever repository they use to post their slides, and then they can share the links. And we'll also be asking the RDA organizers to put them up on the web page for the session as well.
Okay, that'd be great. And the one other thing, there was just some discussion going on around sensitive data, quality of data and stuff. So how do we handle those? I mean, typically, we put a restricted access to sensitive data, even if it's a de-identified. But first thing to check is informed consent. And then whether there's an IRB protocol, and then IRB approves it, then we start to curate. But I don't know how others, handle this thing. There are some repositories that are specialized for qualitative data, like ICPSR or QDR kind of thing. But as an institutional repository that offers restricted access to sensitive data. That's how we typically handle, but I don't know how, other repositories handle about the sensitive data.
Certainly, and related to your question, we also have recently the CARE principles, and there we're looking to protect the data that might be sensitive in terms of being data about indigenous peoples'
Right.
lands or about the indigenous people themselves. And in the past, this hasn't necessarily been recognized as sensitive data, but more recently with the CARE principles, repositories are starting to understand that it's just as important to protect the data that come from the indigenous territories and peoples, as well as other types of sensitivity, such as human subjects, etc.
Right. I think CARE data principles are not as widely known as a fair data principle, so it is important to kind of increase awareness of that, within
Yeah,
the
I
community.
suspect there will be a paper coming out about repository guidance to adhere to the CARE principles. That should be coming out in the Data Science Journal soon, and that's a very large team has been working on that for a few years.
Nice, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
No. And do we have any questions for any of the speakers? Okay, well, I have a question actually, and it's actually most related to the last talk by Chris Hunter, but what I'm wondering is because you have a unique situation there where you have not only a data repository, but the journals associated with that, and what I'm wondering is if you're in all cases, if the same reviewer is reviewing the manuscript and the data, or if there are situations where additional reviewers are asked to review the data because the manuscript reviewers might not be experts in the data itself.
So essentially the sort of the peer review process that normally goes through most journals, that isn't changed effectively. We invite peer reviewers based on their scientific backgrounds, and they will review the manuscript in its entirety as best they can, given their expertise. And we don't, that's exactly what they do. There's still got to be two peer reviewers that are offered to give open peer reviews, and they basically make the decision on whether the manuscript is worthy, as it were. The data side of things is purely done in-house. So myself and my team are the only ones that specifically look at the data to be available. In theory, the reviewers should also make use of that data, but I have no data, or I have no information on whether they actually do that all of the time, some of the time, none of the time, or whatever. So yeah, that is one of the aspects that we know that we need to look at internally as to how many times they actually look at the data we're preparing for them to look at.
Yeah, that actually raises a great point, Chris, in that we're traditionally, we often see that the people who are reviewing the manuscripts aren't necessarily experts in the data itself, and so they're not able to give the data the kind of review that one would expect in peer review. And what that really is unearthing here is the need for people to conduct reviews of data who actually are experts in the data. That is, they have to know the instruments, the types of methodologies that are being employed in order to review the data and look at different types of variables. And some might be experts in one variable or another, but not necessarily in all the variables. So it might require multiple reviewers with different perspectives who are not only experts in the data and the instruments and methods, but also in the investigating those particular variables that are captured by the data.
Yeah, I agree. The data itself is something, I mean, obviously, even my team, we're not experts in every different source of data. So we're data experts in that we know how to move files around, and we know how to look at files, and we know what formats they're likely to be in. But yeah, when it comes to the actual content of the data files, no, we're sort of in the dark, especially, well, we have got, at the moment, we've got an in-house imaging expert. So he's very good at pulling in information about the images. So he knows what to look for in particular images and whether it's got the relevant metadata associated to the images. So he can look at some of those. I'm a metagenomics background, so I can look at metagenomics data and know that if I'm looking at a biome file, I know what I should be looking at in there. But essentially, it's very subject specific. So yeah, we don't have the expertise to cover everything within house. So yeah, at some point we're going to have to look down that road and work out which data reviewers externally we want to pull in to look at the different things. But yeah, that's an exciting bridge to come over.
Yes, and I see Kirsten also has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to to that, because that was exactly, or is exactly our challenge at the moment, that you need those experts in really making judgment on the data quality. And I think, and I mentioned with the volume of data and diversity we're getting, what we really can only do is establish a framework that gets peer-reviewed and approved to make sure there is a comprehensive set of metadata, which we can then automate the checking, with that framework. I, don't see how otherwise we can really scale up with, and I'm really curious to everybody who presented and who is here, what their experiences are with getting reviewers, getting them back, as Bob said at the very beginning. It's like you don't want to overburden people. They're already complaining about doing review of manuscripts, of the actual papers. Nobody really wants to add more to their burden. There have been suggestions of involving more of the lab managers, the instrument operators, and so on, who have insights into the technical aspects. So, just, learning more about experiences that others have had would be really helpful to establish the right approach. And has anybody had awards or for reviewers and something? Did it make a difference in their willingness? I think yeah. Maybe there can be some follow-up of the session, because I see that we only have 8 minutes left.
Robert, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, Sung Young. Yeah, I was saying that's a great idea, Kirsten, and perhaps we should have that as a follow-up to this session for RDA P23 in Costa Rica.
Sounds like an excellent idea.
Yeah, we could delve right into the requirements for the reviewers, as well as incentives for the reviewers. I see. Oh, Sung Young, did you have your hand raised as well?
Yes. So that's a great question. So I kind of view, so I'm a data librarian, but I also curate data for our institutional data repository. So more publishers require data to be deposited in a repository, provide DOI. And we can provide a private link to reviewers to see the data. But I think a lot of kind of responsibility falls on the repository, because they have to make sure data meets a certain quality, make sure they're fair. I keep emphasizing the fair principles of the data, because that's what makes data findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So the whole point of sharing data is to make sure we can reuse it, right? So that's what is the whole thing. And I didn't hear much about persistent unique identifier, PIDs, in this discussion. So I kind of want to plug that in because that's what makes the data, discoverable so they can be reused. We make sure we have a license information so people know what to use, but as a repository and data reviewers, make sure people use persistent unique identifiers so they can be all linked and machine actionable. Computer can find it and stuff like that. So there were a lot of separate sessions during this, RDA about his strategy. So, but I want to kind of relate it to this group because kids are very important in the, data repository and making data fair. So metadata and the PIDs are the, center of the fair data. So I just want to throw that in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sonia. And I also see Lily Zhang. Lily, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Just a quick comment as per Christine's question on promoting the day review. Actually, I have also been engaged with a day journal called the China Scientific Data, and we also have been managing the China Scientific Bank, like for me, for a couple of years. And during that time, my experiences probably will be that the data review is more complicated compared with the review of the knowledge in papers. So for data reviews, our previous work is to have like the face-up assist within the repository or the journal with the kind of data editors who make the review first. So for the data reviewers, what they do first is probably something technically. These editors are from the particular disciplines, like they are capable of remote sensing data, some of them for biodiversity data, some for computing science and something like this. So at least for the checklist of the full data review, they could do something like for the completeness, something like the accuracy, and they could use the particular domain software to have kind of a task to do a few works to share the burdens for data review. And finally, based on this, they will also have the open core for peer reviews to review the extra part, like the innovative part and something more closely related to the research innovations. I think that. So it depends. Thank you. Oh, I think you are muted. I can't hear you.
I'm trying to do three things at once. Sorry. And thank you. Thank you very much, Lily. I noticed also in the chat that Raina Jenkins made a great comment about the potential for redundancy. That is between the repository and the publishers of the articles. And while we were talking earlier about making sure that we've got complete coverage, the complementary problem is if there's redundancy in that, and as it is, we have very few reviewers, so that could be a challenge too. Anyway, I don't see any other hands raised, but I think that the points that Kirsten and Devin brought up about having a follow-on to this session might be a great idea for our DA Plenary 23 in Costa Rica, and there we could explore how we might be able to improve the recruitment of experts for conducting data reviews, and also how we might be able to appropriately recognize them for their efforts or reward them, that is, to provide incentives, basically, because often just like for article reviews, we have the data reviewers as volunteers. And, you know, people have heavy workloads. And adding more to it, and data reviews are relatively new in terms of the whole traditional science practices, but they're critical. So I think we need to find a way to squeeze this into everybody's practices as we change the culture of science. And I see Chris also has his hand raised.
Yeah, just to sort of follow up on the point about incentives. So obviously peer reviews in terms of the journals has always been not paid, and there's a good reason for that. That's because of the biases that are involved when you start paying people to do these things. So that's something we do need to think about if we're going to talk about incentives for data reviews. It might not be such an issue because it's not the same sort of reward situation, but you know, it's still something to bear in mind that if you're going to start paying people to do reviews in incentivizing ways, then yeah, it's worth thinking what the consequences of that might be.
Yes, excellent points, Chris. And I want to say thank you to all the presenters, all the co-chairs, and to all of the attendees, those who participated today in this, to make this a great session. And I agree that I think we really need to have a follow-on session for RDA P23. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll start working on putting that together right away. Thank you all.
Thanks, all.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
These issues definitely aren't going away, so it would be good to kind of pool our collective wisdom about how to approach this.
Yes, excellent. Talk to you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye.